They made her stand in the cold so the whole pack could watch her be unwanted. 5 times now. 5 callings, 5 alphas, 5 turned backs, and each time she walked back to me through the snow with her chin up and her hands shaking, and each time I wrote her name down in my keeping book like I was the only one in the world who still thought it worth recording. I am old. I have buried more of these children than I can count. But I am telling you this story because of what happened on the 6th night, when the king himself came down from the mountain that none of us are supposed to climb, and stopped in front of everyone, in front of the one girl no one would touch. You will think you know how this ends. You don't. Neither did I. Stay with me. I keep a book. I should tell you that first, because it explains a great deal about how I see things, and I would rather you understood my faults early than discover them later and feel cheated. It is a thick thing, the keeping book, bound in deer hide that has gone soft and dark from 40 winters of my hands on it. In it I write the names. Not the names of the strong ones, the council keeps those, painted on the long stones outside the great hall, gilded for the ones who matter. I write the others. The ones who come to the low house, which is the long, cold building at the bottom of the hollow where we put the wolves nobody else wants. The unmated past their time. The lame. The scarred. The ones whose wolves went quiet and never spoke again. I write their names because someone should, and because I have learned that a person can survive almost anything except the suspicion that they will pass through this world without leaving a mark in it. I write Cora's name more than anyone's. Cora, Cora, Cora. I have written it crying and I have written it furious, and once, the night of the 3rd calling, I wrote it so hard the bone needle I use for a pen tore the page, and I had to sew the page back with thread, which is the only mending I have ever been good at. But I am getting ahead of myself. Old women do that. We have so much behind us that it spills forward. Let me begin where it mattered. It was the night of the 5th calling, and the snow had come early. I remember the snow because it got into everything, into the seams of my shawl, into the joints of my knees, into the broth I was carrying across the yard to the low house for the ones too sick to come out and be looked at. The hollow is a bowl between 3 ridges, and on calling nights they light the bonfires up on the rim so the whole valley glows orange against the black, and the smoke comes down into the bowl and sits there like the breath of something enormous and patient. You can smell pine resin burning. You can smell the fat dripping off the roasting meat. And under all of it, if you are old enough and have stood in enough of these crowds, you can smell the fear coming off the ones who are about to be looked over and found wanting. I have a good nose. It is the one thing age has not taken from me. Cora was standing at the edge of the firelight when I came up with the broth. She did not stand with the other unmated girls. She had learned by the 5th time where she was wanted to stand, which was nowhere, which meant the edge. She held herself very straight. That was the first thing anyone ever noticed about her, and the last thing they remembered, that straightness. The way she held her shoulders square even when the whole valley was leaning away from her like she carried a sickness. She was not beautiful in the way the council likes. Her left side bore the burned scars from the night her mother died, the night the den at the high meadow went up in fire and took everything Cora had, including, we all believed, her wolf. The scars climbed from her wrist to her jaw in a pale river. She kept her hair long on that side to cover it, and it never quite covered it. And her wolf had been silent for 14 years. She could not shift. In any pack, a wolf who cannot shift is a person with 1 foot already in the grave. Because what use is she? The council asks. What does she bring? Who will she protect? Who will protect her? I will tell you what she brought. She brought soup to dying strangers in the snow, but the council does not weigh that on its scales. The 5th alpha came from the river Pax, a broad man with a beard and a way of looking at women like he was counting coins. He walked the line of the unmated, and the line went still, and hopeful the way a field of grain goes still before wind. Every girl praying me, choose me, take me out of here. And he stopped in front of a pretty thing named Senna, and everyone exhaled, and then his eyes drifted past Senna to the edge of the firelight where Cora stood, and the whole valley held its breath, because he had looked at her. He had actually looked, and for one terrible, hopeful moment I thought. He laughed. That is the part I cannot forget. He did not even bother to walk over and reject her properly. He looked at her across 40 feet of snow and firelight, and he laughed, one short, ugly bark of it, and he turned to the man beside him and said something I could not hear but did not need to hear, and the man beside him laughed too, and then it moved through the crowd the way fire moves through dry grass, that laughter, and Cora stood in the middle of it with her chin up and her shoulders square, and the bowl of borrowed firelight trembling on her scarred cheek. I dropped the broth. I am not ashamed to say it. The bowl cracked on a stone and the steam went up white and was gone. She found me at the back of the crowd afterward. She always found me. I think I was the only fixed point she had, the old woman with the book who would write her name down whether anyone laughed or not. "You're spilling good broth on the ground," she said. Her voice was steady, steadier than mine. "Old hands," I said. "Old eyes too, you're crying." "It's the smoke." "It's not the smoke." She picked the cracked halves of the bowl out of the snow and stacked them neat, the way she did everything, because a person who has been told she is worthless will sometimes spend her whole life proving she is at least useful, will spend it stacking bowls and bandaging strangers, building a case for her own existence one small competence at a time. It broke my heart to watch. It still does. "Marin," she said. "That is my name, Marin. I should have told you. Don't write tonight in the book." "I write every calling." "Don't write this one. I don't want to read it later." She looked up at the rim where the fires burned. The river Alpha was up there now, dancing with Senna, who he had taken after all. 5 is enough to remember without ink. I wrote it anyway later when she was asleep. I am not proud of disobeying her, but the book is the only place I have ever been able to say the things I cannot say out loud, and what I wrote that night was, "Fifth calling." She did not cry. I did. If there is justice in the world, it has lost her name, and we must shout louder. You should understand how the Low House works, because it matters to what came after. We are not a kind pack. I will say that plainly, because I have lived here all my life and earned the right to say it. The Hollow Pack prides itself on its strength, on its bloodlines, on the long gilded stones outside the Great Hall. Strength is a religion here, and the weak are its heretics. The Low House exists because even a hard pack cannot quite bring itself to leave its broken ones to die in the open. That would look bad to the other packs, would suggest a lack of honor. And so instead we keep them tidied away at the bottom of the bowl, fed just enough, looked at twice a year at the callings on the small chance some desperate alpha from a poorer pack might take one off our hands. I run the Low House. I have run it for 30 years, since my own daughter, but no. I said I would not do that yet. I will, but not yet. There were 11 of us in the Low House that winter. Old Tomas, whose hip had shattered in a border fight and never set right. The twins, Belle and Wisa, whose mother had died birthing them and who had simply never been claimed by anyone, 2 quiet girls who finished each other's work. A boy named Pell, 16, whose wolf was strong but whose mind worked slow and gentle, which the council found unforgivable. And Cora. And Cora was the one who held them together. I want to be careful here because it is easy to make a saint of a person, and Cora would have hated that, would have rolled her eyes at me, the way she rolled her eyes when I fussed. She was not a saint. She had a temper she kept on a short leash, and sometimes the leash slipped. She could be proud to the point of foolishness, would refuse help she desperately needed because accepting it felt like admitting she could not stand alone. She held grudges. She once did not speak to Tomas for a week because he said her stitching was crooked, which it was, and which she knew it was, which is why it stung. But when Pell woke screaming from his night terrors, it was Cora who went to him every time and sat on the cold floor by his pallet and told him stories in a low voice until his breathing slowed. When the fever went through the Low House 2 winters back and I was too exhausted to stand, it was Cora who took the broth round, who washed the sick, who sat up 3 nights running with old Tomas when we all thought he was going, who did not sleep so that others could. She could not shift. Her wolf was a silent stone inside her, and she had decided, somewhere in the long humiliation of her life, that if she could not be strong in the way the pack valued, she would be strong in the only way left to her, which was to refuse flatly, stubbornly, every single day, to become as cold as the people who had cast her out. That is a kind of strength too. It is just not the kind they paint on stones. The morning after the fifth calling, I found her already up, breaking ice off the water barrel with the heel of her hand so the others could drink. Her knuckles were split and bleeding. She had not bothered to use the iron breaker that hung right there on the wall. "Use the tool," I said. "The tool's frozen to the nail." "So thawed." This was faster. She did not look at me. The split knuckles wept red into the ice. "Marin, there's a thing I have to tell you and you're going to be angry." I sat down on the bench by the door. When the young announce in advance that you will be angry, it is best to sit. "The River Alpha," she said. "Before he left this morning, he sent his second down here with an offer." "What offer?" She finally turned around. The morning light was flat and gray and merciless, and it lit every scar she had. "He'll take me, not as a mate. There's a word for it in the river packs. A bound servant. I'd belong to his hall. I'd work the kitchens, the kennels. I wouldn't be sent to any more callings. I'd be settled, provided for, not laughed at least not in front of the whole valley twice a year." She said it fast, the way you pull a splinter. "And in exchange, I'd never be free again. I'd never be anyone's mate. I'd belong to him the way the cookpots belong to him." The water barrel dripped. Somewhere in the back, Pell was humming to himself. "You're considering it," I said. "I'm 23, Marin. I've been to 5 callings. There won't be many more. You know what happens to the unmated who age out of the callings. They cast us up the North Ridge at the first hard frost, and they call it returning us to the wild, and we both know what it actually is." Her voice did not break. That was the worst part. She had thought this all the way through in the cold dark alone, and decided it without weeping, the way you decide which of 2 terrible roads to take when there is no third. "A bound servant gets to live. A bound servant gets fed. Maybe I get to keep my hands busy and my head down and just last a while longer. I have made a great many mistakes in my long life, but I want it on record here in my own telling that I did not tell her to take it. I wanted to. God help me, I wanted to, because I would rather have had her alive and bound in some distant river hall than thrown up the North Ridge in the frost. An old woman's love is a selfish, frightened thing. It wants the beloved to survive, and it does not always ask survival at what cost." But I looked at her split knuckles and her square shoulders, and the way even now, even discussing her own enslavement, she had positioned herself between the cold doorway and the sleeping boy in the back, so that the draft would hit her and not him, and I could not do it. "If you take it," I said, "you'll last. You're right. But the part of you that goes to Pell at night, the part that breaks ice with her bare hands so the others can drink, that part doesn't last. That part dies in a river kitchen and you go on without it, and that, Cora, is a different kind of being cast up the ridge. It just takes longer and nobody calls it what it is." She looked at me for a long moment. "You're supposed to want me to live," she said quietly. "I want you to live as you," I said. "I'm too old to want anything smaller." She turned back to the ice. She did not give me an answer. She broke ice until her knuckles bled fresh, and then she carried the water in, and I sat on the bench and shook, because I did not know if I had just saved her or killed her, and at my age you would think you would know the difference, and the cruelest thing I have learned is that you never do. She had until the next frost to send word to the River Alpha. The next frost was 11 days off. "I will tell you about my daughter now," I said I would. Her name was Iva, and she was born wrong. That is the word they used. Wrong, her hind legs in the wolf shape twisted so she could never run with the pack. She was the gentlest soul I have ever known, and the pack had no place for the gentle who could not run. They did not cast her up the ridge. They were subtler than that. They simply let it be known, year on year, that she was a burden, an embarrassment, a thing her mother should be ashamed of. Until one spring when she was 19, she walked up the North Ridge by herself, in good weather with no frost to drive her, and did not come back. They found her 3 days later. I will not tell you the rest. I built the low house after that. Or rather, the council let me run the cold building they already had, and I made it into something that at least tried to be a house, because I could not save Iva, and so I tried to save the others, which is a thing grief does to you. It makes you spend the rest of your life trying to mend a wound that closed long ago in someone who is gone. So you see, when I told Cora not to take the River Alpha's offer, when I told her to risk the frost rather than die slowly in a kitchen, I was not only speaking for her. I was speaking for Iva, who took the smaller road, the survivable road, the road of being a burden quietly, until even quiet was too much. I have wondered since whether I had any right to put my dead daughter's weight on Cora's living shoulders. I have wondered a great many things since. On the 9th day before the frost, the king came down from the mountain. Nobody believed it at first. The runners came in shouting, and we thought they had drunk something. The king does not come to the hollow. The king does not come to any of the lesser packs. He summons us to Hyrich, the citadel on the White Mountain, when he summons us at all, which is rarely, because we are small and poor and far, and he has an entire kingdom of stronger packs to mind. King Soren had held the high seat for 6 years, since his father died, and in those 6 years he had set foot in the hollow exactly never. And now there were 40 riders coming down the western pass under the king's gray banner, and at the head of them rode a tall man on a black horse, bareheaded in the cold, and the whole hollow lost its mind. I will be honest, my first thought was not romantic. My first thought was, what have we done wrong? Kings do not visit the poor to admire them. The council ran in circles. The great hall was thrown open, the long gilded stones outside it hastily swept of snow, the best meat dragged out, the unmated girls, the acceptable unmated girls, scrubbed and braided and lined up before anyone had even asked them to be, because hope is a reflex in a place like this, the way flinching is. And down in the low house we did what we always do, which is nothing, because nothing involving the great hall has ever involved us. I told the others to stay in. I told Cora especially to stay in, because the last thing I wanted was the king's fine riders catching sight of the low house's scarred girl and making sport of her the way the River Alpha had. She did not stay in. Of course she did not. She was Cora. I sent her to draw water from the deep well by the tree line, the only chore that took her out of the bowl and away from the great hall, and I thought that was the end of it. What I did not know, what none of us knew, what we would only piece together later, was that the king had not come to admire anyone. He had come because 9 days before, riding the high ridges alone the way he was known to do, brooding on the crown he had never wanted and the alliance marriage the council of Hyrich was pressing on him, King Soren had caught, on the wind coming up out of the hollow, a scent. One scent in all that valley of smoke and fear and roasting meat. And it had stopped him on the ridge like a hand on his chest. He told me this himself later, so I am not inventing it. He said it was not a smell so much as a recognition. The way you might hear, in a crowded hall, in a language you have never learned, a single word that you somehow understand means home. He said he turned his horse 3 times trying to ride away from it, and 3 times the horse came back to the ridge as if it knew better than he did. He said he did not sleep for the 9 days. He said he told his council he was riding to the hollow to inspect the western border for raiders, and his council believed him, because what else would take a king to a place like ours? He did not know whose scent it was. He did not know if it belonged to a child, an old woman, a man, a mate, a married woman, a corpse. He only knew that it was the thing his wolf had been waiting for since before he had a name for waiting, and that it was coming up out of a poor cold valley at the edge of his kingdom, and that he could not, would not, did not have the strength to ride away from it a 4th time. So he came down. 40 riders, the gray banner, the open hall, the scrubbed and braided girls. And he walked past all of them. I was not there for the start of it. I heard it the way you hear a flood, as a rising noise, a wrongness in the air, people running the wrong direction. I came out of the low house with broth on my hands and saw the crowd at the great hall breaking apart, spilling down into the bowl, following something. And I followed too, my old heart going like a trapped bird, because some animal part of me already knew it was going toward the tree line, toward the deep well, toward. He was standing in the snow by the well. King Sauron, tall, dark, plainly dressed for a king, his fine riders frozen behind him not understanding, the whole hollow pouring down the slope to watch. And in front of him, one hand still on the well rope, the bucket half raised and forgotten and dripping, her long hair fallen back off the scarred side of her face because she had not had time to fix it, stood Cora. She was looking at him, the way you look at a thing you do not believe is real. He was looking at her the way the rest of us, in our whole hard lives, had never once been looked at by anyone. The council head pushed forward, breathless, bowing. Already talking, Your Majesty, you must forgive her. That one is from the low house. She is broken. She cannot even shift. Let me bring you the others, the proper others, and his hand closed on Cora's arm to pull her away, to remove the embarrassment, to fix the terrible mistake of the king's eyes landing where they should not. And King Sauron said one word. He did not shout it. That is what I remember. A lesser man would have shouted. He said it quietly, almost gently, but it went across that frozen bowl and up the 3 ridges, and into every one of us like a blade going into snow, clean and absolute and very cold. He said, "Don't." The council head's hand fell away from Cora's arm. And the king took one step toward the most rejected woman in the whole valley, the one we had all laughed at, the one I had written into my book 5 times in grief, and the snow came down between them, and I stood at the back of the crowd with broth freezing on my hands, and I thought. I did not know what I thought. For the first time in 40 years of keeping that book, I had no words for it at all. You would think a king saying don't in the middle of a frozen valley would settle a thing. It does not. It only changes the shape of the trouble. I have had 9 days now to understand what happened by the well, and the more I understand it, the less it looks like a rescue, and the more it looks like the opening move in a war, a quiet one, fought not with teeth but with words across a long table. And the prize, the territory being argued over, was a girl who had spent her whole life being told she was worth nothing at all. But I will tell it as it came, because that is the only honest way. After he said don't, the king did not sweep Cora up onto his black horse and ride away into a song. That is not how it went, and I would be lying to you if I pretended it was. What he did was far stranger and, I have come to think, far braver. He stood there in the snow with the whole hostile valley watching, and he said to her, low, just for her, though I was close enough by then to hear, "What's your name?" And Cora, who had every reason in the world to fall at his feet, looked at this man who had stopped the world for her, and lifted her scarred chin and said, "Why? So you can laugh at it like the last one. I want you to sit with that. The most powerful man in the kingdom had just chosen her, publicly, against all sense, and her first response was a challenge with the safety off. Because that is what a lifetime of cruelty does. It does not make you grateful for kindness. It makes you suspicious of it. It teaches you that the moment you let yourself believe in a soft thing is the precise moment it turns into a hand pulling back to strike. Cora had been laughed at 5 times. She was not about to be laughed at a 6th by lowering her guard. The fine riders behind the king stiffened. You do not speak to his majesty like that. The council head made a strangled noise. The king smiled. It was not a king's smile. It was a tired, surprised, helplessly human smile, the smile of a man who has been bracing for the wrong battle and just discovered the real one. "Sauron," he said. "My name's Sauron, yours." A long, long silence, snow on snow. "Cora," she said at last, like she was handing over something she might want back. "Cora," he repeated, and he said it the way I write it in my book, carefully, like it was worth the saying. And then, because he was no fool and could feel the whole valley's hostility pressing in and could see her getting ready to bolt, He did the wisest thing he did that whole strange day. He took one step back. He gave her the well, the rope, the bucket, the space. He said, "I'm not going to take you anywhere. I came down off that mountain because I couldn't ride away from, and here even a king ran out of words from whatever this is. But I'm not him. I'm not any of them, so I'm going to stay. In your valley, not your hall. And you're going to decide what you believe about me with your own eyes in your own time. Is that fair?" It was not what anyone expected. The council had laid out the great hall, the meat, the braided girls, and the king turned his back on all of it and asked a low house woman whether he was being fair to her. She did not answer. She finished drawing the water. I swear to you, she finished drawing the water, hauled the full bucket up the slope past 40 of the king's riders with her chin up and her hands shaking, and she carried it down to the low house, and she shut the door. And the king let her. That more than the word don't is when I began to think this one might be different. Any alpha can claim. It takes a rare creature to wait. He stayed 11 days, the whole 11 right up to the frost. He would not take the great hall. He had his men pitch their tents up on the rim, and he himself spent his days down in the bowl, near us, not crowding Cora, never crowding her but there, present, a fixed dark shape in the cold that the whole pack had to walk around and could not ignore. The council was beside itself. A king in their valley refusing their hospitality, spending his hours near the low house, the most shameful corner of their world. It was an insult they could not name and could not avenge. I watched her watch him. The first day she would not come out at all. The second day she came out to do her chores with her jaw set, ignoring him so pointedly that the ignoring was its own kind of conversation. On the third day, Pell had one of his bad turns. The strangers, the tents, the tension in the air had frightened him, and his slow, gentle mind could not make sense of any of it, and he went down screaming in the snow outside the low house, thrashing, the way he did. The pack's wolves nearby drew back from him with that contempt the strong keep for the broken. And Cora went to him, the way she always went to him, dropped to her knees in the snow and got his head into her lap and started talking low and steady, the stories, the ones that brought him back. And King Sauron crossed the bowl and knelt down in the snow on the boy's other side. He did not try to take over. He did not command. He just knelt there, this man with a kingdom, in the dirty snow beside a screaming boy that his own council would have called worthless. And when Pell's flailing hand struck him hard across the face, the king did not flinch and did not move away. He stayed. He let the boy come back at his own pace, in Cora's arms, with the king's steady presence on the other side like a windbreak. And when it was over, when Pell was breathing slow again and ashamed and small, the king said to him, gently, "You've got a strong wolf. I can smell it. It just runs faster than your words, that's all. Mine does the same." Which was a lie. A king's wolf is the most disciplined thing in the world, but it was the kind of lie that costs the liar something and gives the hearer everything, and Pell looked up at him like the sun had come out. I looked at Cora. She was looking at Sauron over the boy's head, and her face had done a thing I had not seen it do in 14 years. It had come unguarded, just for a moment, just for the length of a breath, and then she caught it and put the guard back up and looked away. But I had seen it, and I think he had seen it too, because he did not push. He just stood and bowed his head to her, a low house woman. The king bowed his head and walked back up to his tents in the dark. That night she sat with me by the fire for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "He's going to leave, Marin. They always leave. And it's going to be worse this time, because this time She stopped. "This time you what?" "This time I almost let myself want it," she said, and her voice did break then, finally, on the 9th day of my knowing her would-be enslavement and the first day of her almost hope. It broke clean down the middle. "And wanting is the thing that kills you. Being laughed at, you survive. You can armor up against laughing, but hopping leaves you open, and then when it goes you've got no skin left on you at all." She wiped her face hard with her bleeding knuckles. "I should take the river offer. At least the river is honest. The river never pretends to love me." I did not argue with her that night. Some despairs you cannot argue with. You can only sit beside them so they are not alone. So I sat, and the fire burned down, and somewhere up on the rim a king who could not sleep watched the smoke of our small fire and waited for a frightened woman to decide whether the world was allowed to be kind. Now I must tell you the other thing, the thing that made it a war. On the seventh day, riders came down the western pass under a second banner, white and gold, the banner of High-Reach Council. They had come looking for their king, who had told them he was inspecting a border and had instead vanished into a poor valley for a week. And at the head of them rode a council lord named Garrick, cold and clever, and beside him in a fur-lined cloak rode a beautiful woman named Lady Ussing, the daughter of the strongest alpha in the eastern reaches, the bride the council had chosen for King Sauron, the alliance marriage that would bind the whole fractious kingdom together under one untroubled line. I learned all of this in fragments from the writers, from the kitchen talk, from Sauron himself in the end. The kingdom, it turned out, was not so solid as a kingdom likes to look. The eastern packs were restless. Old King, Sauron's father, had held them by fear, and fear dies with the man who wields it, and young Sauron had inherited a crown that the eastern alphas were quietly deciding whether to keep letting him wear. The marriage to Ussing was the seam meant to hold it all together. Her father's strength behind Sauron's crown, a child of both lines to rule after. It was not love. Sauron had met the woman 3 times, but it was peace, and a king who refuses peace for the kingdom to chase a feeling up a poor valley is not a king the eastern packs will follow. He is a boy, and boys get pulled off thrones. Lord Garrick understood all of this perfectly. And so, on the 7th day, in the open bowl of the hollow, with the whole pack watching and the king standing his ground and Cora frozen in the doorway of the low house where she could hear every word, Garrick laid it out plain. "You will come home, Majesty," he said, in a voice pitched to Carrie. "You will marry Lady Ussing at the turning of the year as the council has agreed, and you will forget whatever you think you found in this valley. Because if you do not," and here he turned deliberately, cruelly, and looked straight at Cora in her doorway, so that everyone would understand exactly what he meant. "If you throw over the alliance for a broken low-house bitch who cannot even shift, the eastern packs will not kneel to your child. They will say the line is poisoned. They will say the king chose a cripple over the kingdom, and there will be war, Majesty, real war, fire on the border and packs burning, and every wolf who dies in it will have died because a king could not master himself. Is that what she's worth, her? Look at her. Is that worth a war?" The silence in the bowl was the worst I have ever stood in, worse than the 5th calling, because at the 5th calling they only laughed at her. Here, they were weighing her, openly, with figures, the way the river Alpha had weighed her like coins, her single broken life against a whole kingdom of unbroken ones, and the arithmetic was not in her favor. The arithmetic was never going to be in her favor, and she could hear it. She stood in the doorway and heard a kingdom decide she was not worth the trouble of, and she did not run, she did not weep. She just stood there with her chin up taking it, the way she had taken everything. I started toward her. I do not know what I meant to do, throw my old body between her and the arithmetic maybe, but Sauron was already speaking. And here is the part I have turned over and over in my mind, because it is the part where I expected him to fail. I have known many alphas. I have watched them all choose the kingdom in the end. The kingdom is so large and a single life is so small, and it is the easiest thing in the world to call the choosing of the large over the small wisdom, and to walk away from a low house doorway telling yourself you have been responsible. I braced for it. I have braced for that walking away my whole life. My own pack walked away from my Iva with exactly that kind of wisdom. Sauron did not say she is worth a war. He was too honest and too much a king for that. He knew what war cost. He had seen the eastern border. He did not pretend the arithmetic was wrong. What he said was this. He said it quietly, the way he said everything, and he said it not to Garrick but to the whole valley, and then he said the end of it to her. "You've made it a clean question," he said, "her or the kingdom, And you want me to answer it like a king, large thing over small thing, peace over person. And 6 years ago I'd have done it. My father would have done it without losing a night's sleep. He looked around the bowl at all of us, the hard pack that had thrown away its broken for generations and called itself strong for it. But I've been sitting in this valley for a week watching what you people do to your weak. You tidy them into a cold house at the bottom of a hole and feed them just enough that you don't have to feel like murderers. And you call it strength. And here's what I've worked out, Garrick, sitting in the cold watching a scarred woman who can't shift go to a screaming boy every single night when not one of you would cross the snow for him. That's the kingdom. Not the alliance. Not the bloodlines on the gilded stones. The test of a kingdom is what it does with the one it could most easily throw away. And a crown I can only keep by throwing her away is a crown I'd be ashamed to wear. So no, I won't marry Ussing. And if the East wants a war over it, then the East has told me exactly what kind of king they wanted me to be, and I would rather lose the throne than be it. You could have heard a needle drop in the snow. Lady Ussing, and I will say this for her, she had more grace than the lord who brought her. Lady Ussing looked at Sorin for a long moment, and then, astonishingly, she laughed. Not a cruel laugh, a soft, rueful one. My father said you'd be trouble, she said. He'll be insufferable about being right. And she turned her horse, and that was the alliance bride giving back the alliance, which I did not know a person could do. And the war that Garrick had promised suddenly had a great deal less wood under it, because you cannot easily burn a border over an insult the insulted party has shrugged off. It was not solved. I want to be clear, because the songs will solve it and the songs will be lying. The East is still restless. Garrick rode home with his jaw tight, and there are letters going back and forth across the kingdom even now, and I do not know how it ends. A king who chooses a low-house woman over an alliance has bought himself trouble that will take years to pay off and may not be payable at all. But he chose her. In front of everyone, knowing the cost, nomming the cost, and choosing her anyway. Cora did not throw herself into his arms. I keep telling you this because I keep wanting to remember it true. The songs will have her weep and run to him. She did not. She stood in the doorway through the whole of it, and when it was over, when the white and gold banner had gone back up the western pass, and the bowl had emptied, and it was just the two of them and an old woman pretending to mend a basket nearby, she said, "You're a fool." "Probably," Sorin said. "You've made an enemy of half your kingdom. For me, you don't even know me. You knelt in the snow with Pell for an afternoon and you smelled me on a ridge, and now you've thrown over an alliance. That's not love. That's not even sense. That's a man chasing a feeling off a cliff." "Maybe," he said. "I won't argue, but I notice you're still standing in the doorway arguing with me instead of leaving. So maybe you're chasing a feeling off a cliff too. We could fall together. It's traditional where I'm from." And Cora, gods help me, Cora laughed. It startled out of her, ugly and real, the first true laugh I had heard from her in I cannot say how long, and she put her bleeding-knuckled hand over her mouth like she could shove it back in, and Sorin grinned at her like she'd handed him the throne back, and I bent over my basket and wept into the reeds where neither of them could see. He stayed, not as her king. He could not stay long. A man with a wobbling crown has to go and steady it, but he came back, that winter and the next, again and again, down the western pass, until the runners stopped shouting about it and it became just a thing that happened. The king coming to the hollow, and the hollow learning, slowly, grudgingly, with the bad grace of a hard people forced to reconsider, that perhaps the bottom of the bowl had been worth something all along. Her wolf did not wake. I want to tell you it did. I want to give you the moment, the silent stone inside her splitting open, the great healing, Cora running with the pack at last under a full moon. It would be a fine ending, and I have thought about lying to you to give it to you. But her wolf stayed silent, 14 years silent and silent still. Some wounds do not close just because someone finally loves you. That is a hard truth, and I have lived long enough to owe you the hard ones. Love is not a cure. Love does not undo the fire that took her mother and her wolf in the same night. What love did, what he did, was something smaller and I have come to think larger. He looked at the silence inside her, the thing every other alpha had recoiled from, and he did not try to fix it and he did not pity it. He just accepted it, made room for it, loved the woman with the silent wolf as she was, not as some healed version she might someday become. I didn't fall for a wolf, he told her once, when she wept about it, ashamed, certain he must want the running mate she could never be. I fell for the woman who crosses the snow for the boy nobody else will cross for. Your wolf can sleep its whole life for all I care. I want the one who's awake. I wrote that in my book, the whole sentence. It is the only happy thing in 40 years of that grief ledger, and I went back and read it on bad nights. There is more I could tell you, but I am old, and the fire is low, and I find I want to end this the way it really sits in me, rather than the way a story is supposed to end. We do not know how it comes out. That is the truth. The East is still angry. Garrick is still writing his letters. There are nights I lie awake afraid that they will pull Sauron off his throne for what he chose, and that the cost of him loving her will be a war after all, and that Cora, who has only just learned at 23 in the bottom of a cold valley that she is allowed to want things, will lose him to the very kingdom he gave up for her. Love that costs nothing is easy. Theirs cost everything, and the bill is not yet fully come due. But this morning I went out to break the ice off the water barrel, the way I do, and someone had already broken it. The iron breaker was hung back tidy on its nail, used the proper way, no bleeding knuckles this time. And Cora was standing by the low house door with the morning light flat and gray and merciless on every scar she has, the way it was that first morning after the 5th calling, and she was not standing at the edge of anything anymore. She was standing square in the middle of the doorway like she had a right to it, like she had decided, finally, that she did. She caught me looking. "You're crying again, old woman," she said. "It's the cold," I said. "It's not the cold," she said, and she came and put her arm around me. This girl I have written into my book in grief more times than I can count, and we stood in the gray light and watched the smoke come up out of the valley, and far up the western pass, small as a needle, a single dark rider was coming down the mountain that none of us are supposed to climb.